Hello and welcome. You're watching Business Today TV. I'm Sakshi Batra, and on this special edition of the BT Classroom, we are going to be talking about something which is rarely discussed about the stock markets. Remember, the popularity of unlisted shares as an investment option has grown quite a bit in the recent past, looking at the huge IPO rush that we've witnessed in the last couple of years, and the FOMO that investors have dealt with on missing out on the allotments and the chances to really bag the listing gains as well. So on the show, we will cater to every aspect of the unlisted space and what it has to offer for investors. Joining in on the show with me, I have Mr. Rahul Bhutoria. He's the co-founder and director at Valtrust Capital. Welcome, Rahul, and thank you so much for taking the time out. Let me just tell about you a little bit to all our viewers. Now, Rahul has over 16 years of experience in the investment banking as well as investment management, and the company also invests in various areas and various niche areas as well. So, Rahul, let me just kickstart by asking you on the show about the basics of unlisted shares. What exactly are unlisted shares that we talk about? There's a whole lot of confusion among investors always as to whether these unlisted stocks refer to some stocks that are traded in the grey market. So help us understand some of those clarifications.
So hi Sakshi, and thank you for having me. Let's start with what are unlisted shares, right? So on a very basic term, any company that is not listed, those shares are considered unlisted shares, right? But if I look in the context of what we are talking about companies that have received investments from institution, for example, VCs or Ps, or have fairly become large. The unicorns and the sunicorns that we talk about. These are shares of these companies which are now available for investor to buy, right? So this would be essentially the context of the unlisted shares, for our discussion. The second question is on the gray market, right? The gray market is very different from this, right? So what a gray market essentially does is it gives you an indication of where the price of a share is going to be closer to the IPO or right before the IPO is going to open, right? And many times in the gray market, the transaction does not even take place. It's just an understanding on who's going to pay what amount based on the movement of price. However, when you buy an unlisted share, you're actually making a payment, and those unlisted shares should reflect in your demat account, right? So bear in mind, most of the companies are large enough, which have these unlisted shares and are public limited companies. So it's required for them by law to have a demat account, and hence these shares are available in the investors' demat account.
Okay, so who exactly are the sellers of these unlisted shares, and where does one really come to know about these unlisted stocks?
So, to understand it, let's understand the supply side of it, right? So how does the supply come about, right? So as I said, most of these companies are companies that have got institutional investment.
Right.
Their private equity or venture capitalists have invested into them. Maybe they've got a round of angel investment in the beginning. There are employees that have got stock options in these companies to retain good talent, to acquire better talent. So when all these players try to feed the shares into the market, this is the time the supply comes in, right? Now, how do you come to know about it? So there's a fairly unfragmented market. So you would essentially come to know about it through word of mouth or through friends, family, maybe your investment advisor. So these would typically be the sources that you would come to know these shares are available in the market.
Okay, but are these legal shares? I mean, like if you trade in them, if you buy and sell them, is that a legal aspect?
Yes, so you can buy and sell unlisted shares. It's absolutely fine. There's nothing wrong with it.
Okay, so help me understand how is the price of an unlisted stock really arrived at? Because, once we see the IPO process happening, there's the entire, brokerage houses. There are so many security companies that are onboarded to really take out a valuation. And we do know that there is a process to it. But what about the unlisted stocks? How is the price arrived at there?
So that's an interesting one, right? Because as you rightly said, compared to a listed space where there's a process and there's enough liquidity in a stock to get a price discovery, the price unlisted share essentially works on a few things, right? Primary being supply and demand. How much supply is there for the unlisted share and how much demand is there for the investors in the unlisted share, right? So it's not a perfect mechanism. The second is if based on the news flow around the company. So say for example, if a company says that it is going to go for IPO in the next 6 months, right?
Yeah.
Then you would suddenly see the price of the unlisted share shoot up. And if the company sells its plan to go for IPO, then you will see the shares of those unlisted share price of those unlisted shares come down. Um, to give you an example, in the recent past, a few of the companies have shelved their IPOs, right?
Okay.
And we have seen prices correct anywhere between 30 to 50%, over a period of weeks.
Okay. I'll come to this part a little bit later in the conversation as well to really understand more in detail about this. But first up, just for the benefit of all our viewers, how can one monitor these shares? Like, when we talk about the IPO space or the listed stocks, there is an exchange. There are websites that you can monitor your stocks. There are fintech apps that you can make a watch list of and check all of those movements as well. How does one really monitor these shares? In case you said that, the availability of these shares can only be known by, say, word of mouth, and or in case you're a part of some professional groups which deal with this. But how does one really monitor the prices of these to be able to decide whether or not they want to pick this stock or not?
So it's difficult, right? It's fairly fragmented, and you will have to use multiple sources. So one of course is news article, right? So when you want to monitor the shares, then you have to keep looking at news article, track the news around the shares. There are brokers in the market who have these shares available or who can source the shares for you. So you will have to get in touch with them. There are, your financial advisor or your wealth manager. They could be a good source for you to get this information.
Yeah.
But essentially, there is, as you said, there's no watch list. There's no app. There's nothing that allows you to get an exact price.
Yeah, but when you talk about the wealth managers, I want to understand in terms of the brokers as well. Are there separate brokers completely who work on this? And how does one really know if these brokers are then genuine or not?
So not necessarily separate brokers. There are many stock brokers who would also help you, acquire unlisted shares. The genuinity of these is very important, right?
Yeah.
Because this does not have a clearinghouse mechanism, unlike like in the listed space. So what you should essentially do is you should deal with established brokerages or people that you know or large institutions, right? You should kind of rely on these only to get those shares. So, for example, at Valtrust, it's mandatory for us to deal only with large institutions and brokers and people that we know, so that we can source this for our clients and ourselves.
Okay, okay. Could you give us a sense of how big is the unlisted market currently and how many companies are really getting traded on an everyday basis or right now?
So tough, tough. It's a very fragmented market. It's not that easy. But what I can tell you is this is a fraction of the listed space, right? Both in terms of value and in terms of number of companies, right? So, for example, it's a guess. If for example, if you say 5,000 companies are listed in India, then you would have less than 50 companies which are essentially in this space, and out of them, only few will be more actively traded.
Okay, okay. So first up, for all those investors who are really keen on exploring this space as an investment opportunity, what are the key advantages of investing in unlisted shares?
Okay, so there is innovation in the private space, right? There's these are companies that have fairly good business model and very innovative business models. So that's one of the advantages, that you get innovation specifically in companies whose comparables are not listed in the exchanges, right? So if there's a fairly innovative company, in say for the sport in the sport franchise, right? I don't have a sport franchise listed in the market. So it'll be a good idea to get an allocation
Yeah.
to these companies in the unlisted space. The other advantage is that sometimes these companies, when they go for IPO, they get oversubscribed, and you may not get an allocation at that point of time. So you can get an unlisted allocation before the company goes for an IPO, right? Now, having said that, just please be aware that any company that you buy should either be giving you a better valuation or a better growth perspective than its listed comparable, or fundamentally should be a strong company because the listing of these companies is not.
Sure, sure, sure. That makes sense. For all those investors who may be keen at exploring this space in the pre-IPO investing space in the unlisted shares, they actually do so, I'm guessing, with the hope of making huge profits once they get listed on the stock exchange, just like how you pointed out, that there are higher chances that you get the allocation and then you can actually go in to get that listing gain as well, or in the long term, you end up making better profits. But there is no certainty on whether the stock will get listed or not. We can just estimate that this company so far is interested in launching itself in the IPO process, or like has filed a DRHP with the SEBI. So there are high chances that it may soon launch an IPO, but there is no certainty at all on this. Is that the biggest risk that you would say?
Yes, that would be a big risk, right? And this risk is essentially the risk of liquidity, that you may not get the liquidity event that you hoped for.
Sure.
And the liquidity event is not in your hands either, right? So the company can very well decide, given the market condition, they will not want to go for listing. Apart from this, when you are analyzing the company to invest in, you do not have a you do not have information like the same information you have available on a listed space, right?
Sure.
So you're going to essentially go through news, through friends, family, and rely on investors that have already invested in this space,
Yeah.
and then take a decision to invest in, right?
Yes.
So this would be the while this is the biggest risk, the other two risks will be one, information, and lastly, remember, even when you invest in these, there is a 6 month lock-in that you cannot sell the shares in, right?
Okay.
And within those 6 months, the prices can move significantly. So,
Okay.
recently we've had examples where there have been stocks which have got listed, these new age companies which have got listed, and as soon as the lock-in is finished, there's been a overhang
Sell-off.
of huge supply, and the stocks have corrected
Sure.
significantly. So that's one of the risks that you must also keep in mind, that even when the unlisted company gets listed, there is a risk, specifically after lock-in, that the shares might correct significantly.
And then you will get stuck because you again have your own lock-in period and your money is stuck for that time as well. What if the listing of a particular stock that I may be interested in gets really delayed? Is it possible to take the money off the table once you've invested?
So it is. So similar to what you bought it from someone, you can also, go to your network from which you bought it and, offer those shares for sale.
Okay.
Now, having said that, remember the situation this is, right? It is basically a company that has said, I'm going to go for listing, and then is not listed. So while you may be able to get liquidity, you may not be able to get the price that you want or the return that you want.
Absolutely. So that's also very key and very important to note before one really goes ahead and takes that decision. So help me understand, what are the key factors that one must consider before investing in these unlisted shares?
So one, you would like to see if there's a similar company listed in the stock exchange or not. And if it is, then is this unlisted share giving me a better value, or is giving me a better growth compared to the listed comparable company that you have? Because ultimately you need to get a better return for the illiquidity risk that you are taking. The second thing that you consider is, as I said before, the business model. If the business model is innovative, and you can understand that it's a fairly good growth company in a good growth sector, and you will not get access to such company in the listed space, you should look at that. You should look at that company, right? So I think these would be the two key factors. Of course, underlying all of this, Sakshi, would be the company's earnings should be growing and should the quality
Yeah.
of earnings will be very good, right? Because even if the listing doesn't happen as per promise, you still know you're sitting on a good asset class, and whenever the liquidity event happens, you are going to make a handsome return.
Absolutely noted that. You talked about the lock-in period that one must keep in mind before investing in unlisted stocks. But just like IPO investments, just for our understanding, better understanding, for IPO investment, we always invest in lots, and that's been decided by the company and is already informed to the investors in the DRHP. What happens in case of the unlisted stocks? How much money do I need to put in? Is there a minimum amount that one needs to start off with? Are there lots? Help us with those information.
So it's very dependent on a company because unlike a listed space where there's a regulator, there's no one who's essentially telling you what to buy and sell. You can buy one share or two share or three shares,
Okay.
or you can decide to buy a much bigger lot of shares. There are companies that we have seen that have uh, ensured that investors can only buy certain lot of shares, right? But majority of the companies that we see, there is no restriction on the number of shares that you can buy, or the lots you can buy, or the value that you can buy. It's essentially a negotiated transaction between the buyer and the seller.
Right. Okay. And is there also any taxation aspect that one must be aware of on the unlisted stocks?
Yes, so unlike the listed space where it's very clean and nice, it's a preferential taxation essentially because it's a short term within 1 year and long term after 1 year. In the unlisted space, if you sell a share within 2 years of acquisition, you will have to pay your slab rate as your tax. However,
Okay.
after 2 years, it's going to be a long term capital gain, which is 20% with indexation benefits.
Hmm. Okay. And in the end, Rahul, I want to find out that, for all the benefit of all our viewers who may be now contemplating to look at this space as a potential opportunity for investment, when exactly should one really look at investing in these unlisted shares? Who is a potential investor? Who is the right investor to really approach this space?
So, I would say investors who have a higher risk appetite because ultimately you are parking your money in an asset where there's significant illiquidity risk and you need to have very long-term time horizon. If you have more immediate need for the cash flow, this is not the asset class that you should look at. Right? So, we would typically say that people who have larger portfolios can allocate a very small part of the portfolio towards this with a clear understanding that the liquidity may be stuck for a period of time, right?
Absolutely.
And of course, you need to look when to buy this. That's also very important. Um, last year we saw a plethora of people buying unlisted shares, right? And it was during a bull run where people bought unlisted shares at very expensive valuation, right?
Okay.
So when apart, you need to see that one, what the valuation is, and can I justify this valuation even when the bull run is not there, right? Because if you
Hmm.
buy it in the bull run and the IPO happens in the bull run, but your lock-in finishes after 6 months and you may not be in a very bullish market at that point of time.
Right.
So you need
Absolutely.
you need to keep this timing per se also in mind.
Okay, well, understood that. Thank you so much, Rahul, for being with us on this show and sharing with us all the insights on this unlisted stock market space as well, and helping all our viewers really understand that this is also as an emerging place that investors are investing in it currently. Although unregulated at this point in time, there are a lot of companies that are already getting traded in this unlisted space. There was a lot of demand in last year when you said that when there was a huge IPO rush, and maybe again in 2023 when we again are hoping to see many more companies also bring in their IPO. So already some of those are getting traded in the unlisted space. However, as a word of caution, one must definitely speak to their own financial advisors before taking any decision to invest in the unlisted stock market space. Thanks a lot for tuning in onto this edition of BT Classroom.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.